Hey there, students. Thank you for being part of this presentation today. My name is Luis Silva, and our topic is World History, the French Revolution, 1789 to 1799. What will we learn today? Today we are going to identify the causes and results of the revolutions in France, in this case in 1789. Before we keep on going, I do want to say that the French Revolution is one of the most important events in world history, and that we are not going to be covering every single event. So it's very important for you to do extra research in order to be well informed. But let's look at some of the reasons for the French Revolution. In the 1700s, France was the cultural capital of Europe. It was home to numerous Enlightenment thinkers, and it had acquired wealth from colonies. King Louis XIV was the most powerful king in Europe. After his death in 1715, Louis XV and Louis XVI continued to rule France as absolute monarchs. But every good thing has to come to an end. And in this case, political and economic problems led to the French Revolution in 1789. France was going through many problems, but one of the biggest problems that France had was its unequal social hierarchy, which was made up of three classes, also called states. The first state is the clergy. The clergy of the Roman Catholic Church made up the first state. They owned basically 10% of land in France, but paid little in taxes to the government. And this state was actually made up of less than 1% of the population. The second state was made up of rich nobles, and they owned about 20% of French land, but were exempt from paying taxes. This state, in this case the second state, was made up of about 2% of the French population. So you basically have between the first state and the second state about 3% of the entire French population. The third state made up 97% of the population, and it included poor peasants and the educated middle class. This group paid 50% of their income in taxes. Therefore, many people reacted against this injustice because they were forced to pay so many taxes when the other two states basically paid little or nothing. The members of the third state were very angry, and they resented the special treatment to the first and second states. Members of the third state gained inspiration from the Enlightenment thinkers, those individuals such as John Locke, Voltaire, and Rousseau, and those ideas led them to the French Revolution. After the success of the American Revolution, the third state began demanding democracy, equality, and liberty in France, and they were not going to gain these demands easily until they actually had to rebel against the government. Social tensions were made worse by the growing financial crisis in the 1770s and 1780s. The French government faced massive debts due to decades of lavish spending, expensive wars, and poor economic planning. And here you have at the bottom an image of government debt, the percentage of total government revenue. And you can see here how in 1683 it was 22%, in 1715 it went up to 86%, and then you get to 1789 during the French Revolution it was 100%. By 1789, half of the budget went towards interest on the national debt. 25% of people were unemployed, and obviously this led to a lot of people being very upset, angry with the king. The excessive spending by King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette angered French citizens. By the year 1789, France was basically broke. They were out of money, and they faced a serious financial crisis. Louis XVI called for an emergency meeting of the States General, where members from all three classes could advise the king on what to do. During the States General Meeting, the first and second states voted to increase taxes on the third state. The first and second states decided to vote by order rather than by head or by person. If you see to the left-hand side, the number of representatives in the States General by head, you see that the clergy had 300 people, the aristocracy had 300 people, this is the first and second state, and the commoners, which is the third state, had 648 people. This means that the third state would win if they would vote by head, by person. But instead, the first and second state decided that they would vote by states. In this case, the clergy had one vote, the aristocracy had one vote, and the third state, the commoners, had one vote. And this way, the clergy and the aristocracy would always join together, and they would win and make the third state pay more taxes. Very sad situation, which led to the French Revolution. Now, these decisions angered the members of the third state who believed their rights were being violated, and they were right. The third state became very angry, and they formed a new National Assembly to make laws for the French people. In 1789, the National Assembly swore to a tennis court oath, promising a new constitution and limitations on the king's power. The National Assembly wrote their revolutionary ideals in the Declarations of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens, which said, "Men are born free and equal in rights." Rights included liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. And it guaranteed freedom of speech and freedom of religion and equal justice for all. Very important concepts that came out of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens. Meanwhile, the economic crisis continued. Citizens were without food and faced starvations. Angry protesters in Paris demanded new reforms right away. When rumors circulated that the king was going to send his army to Paris, citizens attacked a prison known as Bastille to seize weapons to defend themselves. As you can see from the image here also, it was very bloody. The storming of the Bastille in 1789 represented the beginning of the French Revolution. In the year 1791, Louis XVI saw no other way but to agree to a new constitution that limited his power and created a limited monarchy. By the way, he did not do this out of his own will, but he was forced to do so by angry people all over France. But unfortunately, Louis XVI failed to work with the National Assembly, and France's problems continued to actually get worse and worse. Fearing the spread of the French revolutionary ideas, in this case, Austria and Prussia assembled armies to restore France's absolute monarch. Austria and Prussia were afraid that if the French Revolution was successful, they may be next. Their people may react against them also. Now, a quick discussion question, just for you to think. What should the National Assembly do to solve France's problem? Let's move on. In 1792, radicals took control of France and made very important decisions. War was declared against Austria and Prussia, and 300,000 French soldiers were drafted into a national army in order to defend France. The French monarchy was finally overthrown, and the Democratic Republic was created, and it was called the National Convention. And in this case also the slogan for the French Revolution became liberty, equality, and fraternity. Very important concepts. In 1793, King Louis XVI was arrested, convicted of treason, and was executed by the guillotine. As you can see here from the image to the left, that is what happened to King Louis XVI. Here you have an image. Again, we're looking at the left-hand side, in which King Louis XVI loses his head. Unfortunately, this was the result of the French Revolution. You see the image again to the left. You see King Louis XVI was beheaded, and a sad moment in French history as well as world history. Here we have an image of how the guillotine actually works. You can pause this video to see what happened there, and it explains in details how this machine was so effective in killing people, basically, including the king himself. Now, the radical leaders of the National Convention feared that enemies of the revolution would try to overthrow the new republic, so they reacted against this, and they reacted in a very violent way. In 1793, radical Maximilien Robespierre slowly gained control of the National Convention. From 1793 to 1794, Robespierre executed 40,000 traitors during an era known as the Reign of Terror. By the way, the majority of people that were executed were not even enemies of France. They were executed because Robespierre feared that they would turn against him. The Reign of Terror came to an end when French citizens turned on Robespierre, and they actually executed him too. The French Revolution finally came to an end in 1795, but France was in chaos. The economic crisis had not been solved, and people faced starvation. England, Holland, Spain joined Austria and Prussia in the war against France. The National Convention was replaced by France's third government in 6 years, called the Directory. The Directory proved to be ineffective and also corrupt. Now let's look at Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1799, a French military general named Napoleon Bonaparte basically took control of France, and it was him that continued to bring reforms in France that are still in place today. Napoleon Bonaparte, as an emperor of France, introduced needed reforms. He defeated foreign armies and conquered a massive French empire. We have come to the end of this presentation. Please make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next presentation.